Hey everybody, David Skarica here, Profit from Pessimism. So today's this is a free update. We're gonna do something a little different here. We're gonna talk about being in a lot in the precious metals arena. With gold moving higher the way it is. Let's quickly look at a gold chart before we get into this. We're gonna talk about today the and I really like this gold chart too here, man. I like this little basing. I think that we found our consolidation. Look at we moved directly basically from 3,200 to 4,400. So to go back to 4,000 is fine. And look at we're still way above the 150, 200-day moving average. So, but with precious metals prices this high, we'll quickly look at silver because actually we're talking more about a silver company today. Silver's near in that 50. I talked about silver as a breakout for real. It did break out, but obviously it's going to be tougher for silver to continue that long-term breakout above 50 without kind of a breather. So now we've seen it. If some of you haven't gotten into positions, you're not buying cheap here. But you're still buying, I think, in the midst of a middle of a bull market. And like I've said this, and I'm not going to get into this macro part of it, but it's like Ray Dalio says, this is really a currency devaluation rather than just some kind of it's a trade. It's not a trade. This is something bigger going on with all the debt that the Western governments have acquired all over the world. So anyhow, the reason takeover we're going to talk about is Coeur Mining took over New Gold. Now I own New Gold. I did very well in the deal in our letter, and personally, I had it in a family account. We made about 100% on the trade. I think that's about what we made in our trading thing as well. I sold it because I actually didn't like the terms of the takeover, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So first of all, let's talk about the nature of takeovers. Okay, is we're going to look at a long-term chart of Coeur d'Alene here. Well, Coeur d'Alene has been one of these mismanaged precious metals companies. You can see it's still below the 2024 lows, and or highs. Sorry, way below that, by the way. And you can see in 2024, silver was $8. Now silver is $48. And Coeur d'Alene has gone from like $70 to 14. Now you can see on this recent spike, it did lift, as they say, rising waters lift all ships or pigs fly or whatever you want to call it. It did lift Coeur d'Alene to nearly a 14-year high in its stock price, which is great, right? And now they're using that stock price to take over other companies. But here's what I don't like about the takeover. Coeur d'Alene is doing this, like I said, because it's been mismanaged. They haven't really increased production a whole lot, and the company has struggled now for decades. So they're doing this because New Gold has about $1 billion in revenue, and they want that revenue in additional production. And this is kind of the terms. Now they're saying that this will create $5 billion in cash flow, and combined, these two companies will be worth about 15 billion. So on that. And they'll probably be able to find cost savings, administrative costs, because that's the kind of thing too with the merger. And it's about a 60-40 merger, as you'll see here. So they were taking over New Gold for $7 billion. Again, this is the first problem I had. At the time, Coeur d'Alene was about an $11 billion company, and New Gold was a $5.5 billion company. And so basically 11 and 7. And of course, Coeur d'Alene's stock dropped. And by the way, it dropped so much that the premium didn't even come out. Now Coeur d'Alene's a $9.5 billion company, and New Gold's $5.5. And again, when I see the size of each company, I think to myself, this is more like a merger than a takeover. I like to see a takeover of a larger company take over a much smaller company. A smaller company has more upside to growth, maybe earlier on in its production cycle than a company like New Gold, etc. And I like these mid-tier producers like New Gold because I think that's where your upside is in the market right now. And it's easier to become a $1 billion revenue company and go to 3 or 4 billion than be like a Barrick and have 20 billions in revenues and go to 40 or 50 billion. And Barrick's got a $90 billion market cap. And again, it's easier for a 5 billion company to say go to 20 billion market cap than Barrick to go to say like a 3 or 400 billion dollar market cap. So we can see here it's 62-38, like I said, almost 60-40. So they're saying like the market capitalization, I said 15, so 20 billion. Well, now I'm talking 15 because the stocks dropped in price. When this was happening, like I said, Coeur d'Alene was like a $12 billion company and New Gold was like 7. So it was going to be almost 20, You can see that it's going to be a 1.2 million in gold, 20 million ounces of silver, blah, 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 and gold equivalent. So 20 million ounces of silver and 900,000 ounces of gold a year. So US and Canada, blah, blah, blah. So in safe jurisdictions or perceived safe jurisdictions and whatnot. So you can see that Coeur d'Alene was expecting a billion in free cash flow and 550, blah, blah, blah. And this just talks about it. So my biggest issue with it is, again, I see this as a merger between two mid-sized companies. And I'd like rather see it either a larger company take over New Gold or or maybe New Gold being a $5 billion company taking over a company that's a billion for say 2 billion. So, and again, it's pretty dilutive because all these New Gold shares then go into Coeur d'Alene shares. And you're basically, like I said, 60-40, you're diluting the stock by 40%. Okay, they are increasing the revenues. Coeur d'Alene is expected to do about 1.4 billion in revenues and New Gold a billion. So you are increasing the revenues by 70% to with a 40% dilution. So maybe it's good in regards to that. But again, I just don't see the terms, and it's all stock, and that's the problem. It's dilutive because it's all stock. A combination stock cash deal. I know Coeur d'Alene doesn't have that kind of cash, but even just to throw, I don't know, if you're talking again, this being 7 billion, a few hundred million in cash. So say like you own the New Gold stock, it's you would get whatever you get in the core to stock plus plus a little cash, and that might help the New Gold shareholders hold, right? Because they're going to be like, well, we're going to get so much of the core stock, but I gotta wait for this to complete itself so I can get my little bit of cash too. Like, let's say just for example, you owned $100,000 in New Gold stock. Well, on that 20% premium, say it went to 120, or I think it was 15%. Let's say 20, just make it easy. You go to 120 and you're getting 5 or 6% stock. You're going to sit around and wait for that extra $5,000-6,000 in stock, or sorry, $6,000 in cash. Where when the stock deal gets announced, boom, you're just going to sell. And what happened was, I think the market didn't like the terms of this deal because Coeur d'Alene went down so much. New Gold didn't even get the premium. It didn't even go up. And now that's what's happened. Like New Gold's fallen to about $7 a share, and Coeur d'Alene is $9.50 a share. So, that's kind of what's happened here. So, anyhow, I sold a New Gold. I did very well on it. And now I'm looking for smaller companies. And again, like I said, it's easier for a $5 billion company to become a $20 billion company. Well, it's easier for a $1 billion company to become a $5 billion company if they're getting into production, especially in this market. Like, let me give you an example. New Gold itself. Like New Gold itself, few people kind of remember New Gold itself at the beginning of the year was $2.50 a share. It's almost tripled. At the beginning of 2024, New Gold wasn't much higher than $1 a share. So it's gone up 7x. So this is, I know it's tougher to find companies like that right now because we are further along in the cycle. Silver's rallied hard, gold's rallied hard, but you kind of want to find the next company that's got more upside. And then that means you're looking for a company that is, New Gold had new production come online. ASM had new production come online. This is why these have done so fantastically, because you're expanding production at the same time that gold and silver are going crazy in price. So anyway, I just wanted to show people that. So I don't really like the terms. Like I've said, I don't like the fact that it's two pretty equally sized companies merging. I don't like that it's an all stock deal. I don't like it's really diluting the Coeur d'Alene. And I think it's kind of, I'm not going to say desperation, but it's a deal that's being made because Coeur d'Alene has been poorly run and managed. And also one issue I have with this whole sector is that now you're seeing this with gold prices where they are. And obviously higher prices are always going to bring more M&A, more interest into the sector. But I still remember years ago in the late 90s, Newmont took over Battle Mountain Gold, which is a nice little small producer. And they took them over for nothing, like a few $100 million. And of course, at the time, this was the late 90s when gold was really depressed. It was a great strategy. Newmont took a company over cheap. And then, of course, they got that additional production and profits when it went higher. Like recently, Yamana was taken over as well. And same thing, Yamana was taken over when prices were more relatively cheap. And the company that took over got these great properties and this production and cash flow, which is now expanded exponentially. So that's kind of what I like to see. But I think most of these companies, you see these guys and they're making their, 7-figure salaries and they have all their stock options. And sometimes you think to yourself, they're not much smarter than the average guy in a way. Like they're very driven by psychology. They don't buy things when they're cheap. They don't dispose of assets when when the prices are high, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not an M&A expert. I'm not, I'm not a corporate raider. I live in my little house in the Bahamas and just chill out. But I think I know when a deal feels good, and I'm not Carl Icahn. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie. I'm not Thomas Crown, the Pierce Brosnan character, in the Thomas Crown affair. But I just know what is feels good and doesn't. And I know now, my opinion is New Gold had a lot of upside still. If you go look at New Gold, now granted they have had to dilute, you can see their 2011 high was $13. They can still almost double from current prices to get back to that. But now I think their upside is much more limited with this takeover. Now, Coeur d'Alene, could it go to $50 if we get silver high enough? Yeah, sure. And that would be equivalent to New Gold being at 21. But I rather look for smaller companies, which I think have more leverage to the precious metals prices, et cetera, at these levels. And like I said, you didn't even get this bump in New Gold on the takeover. You didn't. Like, I can just show a short 1 month. Like, you can see New Gold was up to 770. And then New Gold is now basically now below where it was pre-takeover. It was about 730, 740 a share. Now it's $7 a share. So, they didn't even get the bump. And I think that's the market's way of saying, this is not the greatest takeover. So anyhow, so the question is this a good takeover? Personally, I don't think it is. Other people can have their opinions. Opinions is like, what they say. Everyone has one. But that's my opinion on this matter. And I hope you like this a little different kind of, and I like talking about corporate deals like this, just because we are in the precious metal sector. This did involve a stock that I owned in a family account. Everybody take care, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.